is the most valuable form of capital we have. Human capital is very valuable, extremely valuable, but of the physical things, land is it. They're not making any more of it. So underutilizing land should almost be a criminal offense. It's a criminal offense not to allow people to just, over time, make a little bit more density. We call it light touch density. What these largely 33,000 jurisdictions are doing for their own self-interest, they are taking an insect and they're preserving it in amber, which is how scientists find a lot of insects and things that are preserved in amber. That's what they've done with houses.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Keys to Real Estate. Well, many of you let us know that you're deeply interested in understanding how to move the housing market in your area rather than just respond to it. So today, we're looking at new ways to foster economic development and revitalization in areas with underused housing inventory. No surprise, the solutions need to be hyper-local if they're going to be even moderately successful. So today, we're going to look at modern rent-to-own options. We're zeroing in on places where new factories are slated to be built. And we discuss whether it's time for a renaissance to take place in our county seats. Back again is truly one of the leading experts in this space, American Enterprise Institute's Ed Pinto. Let's go. The presenting sponsor for this season of Keys to Real Estate is First American Trust. First American Trust redefines banking for title and escrow companies. They offer innovative solutions that integrate banking functions directly into title and escrow software systems, enhancing operational efficiency and safeguarding financial transactions. At First American Trust, you have direct access to a personal relationship manager who delivers answers in real time. First American Trust is also recognized as an elite provider for the American Land Title Association. As a wholly owned subsidiary of First American Financial Corporation, they have roots in real estate tracing back over 135 years and is the only bank owned by a title company. With deep roots, advanced solutions, and a commitment to real relationships, they are setting a new standard for the industry. The future of banking for title and escrow starts with First American Trust. Visit firstamtrust.com to learn more. At the risk of potentially trying to turn an anecdote into data, living in the Midwest most of my life, adult and otherwise, it's impossible to miss, especially driving through the Midwest, all of the supply that exists that is underutilized in former exceedingly viable towns that are hollowed out. It's hard to not drive through those and estimate the number of units. I'm sure someone has actually counted the units, and wonder if somehow getting those to work with the proper incentives and resources could also help alleviate supply. And it's probably not that simple. As you said earlier, jobs are great. There are fewer jobs in those areas right now, but people with jobs obviously contribute to revitalization. So is there anything to that, or is it just wishful thinking?
As you said, it's not simple, and the federal government has tried all kinds of things, but none of them have worked. Because if they worked, you wouldn't be noticing that.
That's right.
So I sent you a map of new factories that have been announced, and we've tracked 80 of them that have been announced in the last few years under construction. And some of them were in northern Illinois, some were in southeastern Wisconsin, some were, I think, in northwestern Indiana. And they tended to be in smaller towns. And what we have found is that, we're coming out with a study on this, that the larger the factory, the less prepared the area is to provide beds for those workers to sleep in, number one. Number two, that particularly is problematic where you're building them in places that don't have much population. We found some factories with 5,000 employees built literally in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing around it for 10 miles. And so there's no housing. But that's, as I said before, housing is an afterthought in economic development. They're talking about jobs and the taxes those jobs will bring, but they never talk about where the workers are going to sleep at night. And so we've put together a very rigorous analysis of that. But there are places that, particularly in the Midwest, that have a lot of housing stock and it's affordably priced. And if you have factories, unless they're huge size, but 500 employees, 1,000 employees, those places could absorb those. So what we've focused on is the 80 places where that have already been announced, and how well can they absorb it. We could reverse the telescope, so to speak, and say, now let's focus on Mary's places. How much could they absorb? Because in the process, we one of our fortes is we're all data driven. Back to data turned into information, information into knowledge, knowledge into action and policy. And so we have data on single family homes, apartments, single family rentals, you name it, in across the entire fruited plain, property by property by property. And so we create these maps, and we could actually identify places that would be ideal to plop a factory with 1,000 workers in, because they can absorb it. And so thank you for that idea. I will talk to the staff about how we can reverse the telescope and look at it from that direction. The second thing that I've spent more time thinking about is I call it the county seat. Is Galena a county seat? So county seats have an advantage. Cities have gotten hollowed out. They got hollowed out for 2 or 3 reasons. Reason number one is whatever manufacturing and other relatively high-paying jobs they had disappeared. If they had any, they disappeared. Secondly, and maybe even a bigger factor, agriculture has gotten tremendously more efficient in the last 100 years. And so the number of employees you need, farm workers you need to raise whatever it is, 1,000 bushels, whatever of corn, has dropped precipitously. Therefore, cities and towns that were basically, they had the silos, they had the farmers would come, they'd get their feed, yada, 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 yada. But they also had, little supermarket, they had a drugstore, they had whatever, coffee shops, restaurants, all of that. As the population of farm workers goes down, I have a brother-in-law who grew up in a very teeny tiny town in western Iowa. And, it used to be the crossroads, a little market town. But again, as the number of farm workers drops and drops and drops, it's not just the workers, the demand for housing drops, but also there's just no commerce, the demand for commerce. They don't go to the coffee shop, and the coffee shop shuts down. So back to county seats. County seats always had a core function, namely to be the county seat of government, which meant that they didn't shrink and roll up and blow away as much as a lot of non-county seat towns. And so my suggestion that I make to people when talking about this issue is maybe you should focus on a county seat strategy. What can you do to strengthen that county seat? Because you've got the government, lots of times there's a hospital, the county hospital, yes, whatever is in the county seat. Yes. You've got social welfare agencies that are county based that are in the county seat. You've of course got the county government and the jail and the this and the that. And then you have the city government that goes along with the county government. So it ends up being a critical mass. And I stumbled on this looking at the town of, starts with S, in northeastern Florida. I'll think of the name. And it's a county seat. It's 40 miles from Jacksonville. And I think you said, how far is Galena from Dubuque? 12 miles. So it's close to Dubuque. And now part of it is if Dubuque's not growing, I have another theory, which is I divide metropolitan areas into sort of 4 groups. Metropolitan areas and their city, their constituent city, neither one is growing, meaning in terms of new housing, because there's not any population growth, whatever, and so they're not growing. That's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is the suburban area is growing, but the city isn't in terms of new construction. And I'd have to look and see where Dubuque comes out on that. And then the third one is, which is it there in that one? I think
it's going to be more the second.
Yeah. And the third one is both of them are growing. The city and the suburbs are growing. And the fourth one, which I don't know that we found one yet, the city's growing and the suburbs aren't.
I'm not aware of one that would meet that criteria. No.
Yeah. And so you look at Detroit, which falls into the second group. The city is not growing, notwithstanding all the stories you read about the Renaissance in Detroit and they've turned it around and stuff. When we look at real data, not anecdotes, there's not much going on in the city of Detroit in terms of new housing construction. There is a fair amount going on in the suburbs. It's not a boom town, But compared to a place like Flint, it's a big boomtown. Flint suburbs or Akron suburbs or whatever. And we look at a place like St. Louis, which is very active in the city growth and in the suburbs. We look at Philadelphia, which is very active in the city and in the suburbs. In fact, it's actually outshining the suburbs to some extent through some policies that they undertook. So again, I think it's important to first decide, what you are relative to your metro area, core city, and then figure out, okay, if the suburbs are in fact growing, can I get my fair share? Now, the Dubuque is in Iowa, and I know Iowa has been doing a lot on its income tax, and it's basically either phasing out its income tax or is substantially phasing out its income tax, and it's making it, I don't know if they've gotten completely to a flat tax, but they had a progressive tax and they've been doing away with that. They've done some other things in Iowa. I don't know if they've done some things on school choice and things. Again, you then have to say, well, how does Iowa and Illinois compare? And I know Illinois, yes, has taxes up the wazoo. And so it makes it a tough row to hoe because Illinois is shooting itself in the foot with self-inflicted wounds, in terms of policy. Chicago, of course, is the worst because it's doubling down on what Illinois is doing poorly. And as I told you in the green room, I went to the University of Illinois as an undergraduate, and I spent a lot of time during my youth in Illinois. And so I'm very familiar with Illinois, and I've done a lot of study of Illinois, and it's one of the most dysfunctional states in the country. When we talk about the federal government being dysfunctional and being head over heels in debt at 38 trillion, Illinois as a state is basically the state poster child for being head over heels in debt, both at the state and the city level. So that's going to impact the ability of a city like Galena to compete for its fair share in the Dubuque greater metro area.
Right. Which some people will laugh hearing the Dubuque greater metro area.
Well, Dubuque, which is the Quad Cities?
Quad Cities is about about an hour and a half south.
So the Quad Cities, what was the main Quad City? What's that? Davenport.
Davenport. Bettendorf.
Yeah, okay. I remember the Quad Cities, and then Dubuque is further up the Mississippi.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned the county seat strategy, because I wanted to mention that, wherever there's a county courthouse, there will be a title and settlement agent. Usually you just have to, here's the courthouse, just look that way. It's a storefront, and we're in every county in the country. And since we spent so much time last week talking about what the federal government can and can't do, and we did, diagnose that the true move the needle policies to either be retired or retooled or implemented are at that local level. And so again, the people in our business interact with their county leaders every day. They tend to know who their state Senate and congressperson are. So as they're moving about and they're trying to help be part of the solution on this, let's talk through some very specific things that they could be mentioning, advocating for, adopting, taking part of, to bring those location remedies for some of this.
So great series of questions. Again, our data we start with public records data. Which comes from the title industry. There are 3,000 round numbers counties. The public records data are done at the county level. The public records data, give your listeners, to the extent they need it, a little education of this, have roughly two components. It's the deed side, which includes mortgages, and then the tax side, which includes the real estate taxes, et cetera, and the assessment value. But those called generically the public records. And we license the public records from one of the large title companies. It's well known, it's First American. And we also get other data from First American having to do with automated valuations and other things. But it all starts with public records data. And then we build on that with other data that we have. So we have multifamily data that we get from yet another company. We have single family rental data. We have all kinds of data. We have walkability data, you name it. We have zoning data that we get from all these different sources. We have like 30 different sources. And that's how we create these maps and things. So I think number one is, the title industry can rightly take credit for enabling this. There are 4 or 5 companies that sell the assessment data. You know who they are. And that's what really enables this research, number one. Number two, that gets back, which enables the research, all that stuff I talked about the smaller lot, small lot, small lot, with those 13 million homes. We got to that using the assessment data with the year built and with the AVM and with the lot size and yada and the square footage. All of that, with the exception of the AVM, came out of the assessment data, out of the public records data, and then we added the AVM and other things to it. So that really points the way to the solution, which is small lot, small lot, small lot, which the industry is really deeply involved in. So anything the industry can do, to support that and say, yeah, we're happy that our research shines a light. So again, I've sent you a link to our playbooks, of which there are 6,600. So we took that data along with other data, and then we listed right at the beginning of the playbook. Let me see if I can put my hands on the playbook right away.
Yep.
Okay. So we got data from First American, Intercontinental Exchange, Parcel Labs, Zonomics, and Cotality. And then those were private suppliers. And then we have public suppliers, Bureau of Labor Statistics, Bureau of Economic Analysis. Actually, SafeGraph is another data provider, private data provider. U.S. Census. Then we have various mapping facilities, Overture Maps, OpenStreetMap, ESRI Community Maps, Freddie Mac, HUD, the IRS, and the U.S. Geological Survey. So we're pulling data from all over, the place, and that's what we're famous for. And we created 6,600 playbooks, which allow us to do all 50 the nation, all 50 states, hundreds and hundreds of metro areas, including Dubuque, and then thousands of counties and thousands and thousands, another few thousand municipalities. And so we call it Strong Foundations, a playbook for housing and economic growth that we did jointly with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, because they're interested in these issues also. So again, that set of solutions, which focuses on 4 plays in the playbook. Play 1 is small lot, small lot, small lot in new residential subdivisions. I already went through what the huge opportunity is there. But then we have play 2 is, well, if you were able to build more homes on an existing lot, or you could subdivide those lots, which again is something the title industry's, runs through the title industry, then you could build, let me get my national number here, came up with, just on the new residential subdivision side, we came up with 500,000 homes per year could be added from that, which is 10 million homes over 10 years, which translates into that other number because it was 25 years, so a bigger time period. But then you could also get 500,000 homes through this multiple homes on a lot, or subdividing the lots for townhomes or smaller lot homes. That's another 500,000 a year. Now you're talking 1 million a year just on land that it already be used, new residential subdivisions, through growth, or it's already used for a home, but you could use the lot for more homes. And then we have a third piece, also coincidentally 500,000 homes, which is the allowing residential in commercial and light industrial areas. Right now it's illegal in most places to build residential and commercial. Why? Well, again, it goes back to misguided policies from the 90s when the zones had to be completely independent of each other. You don't mix residential and commercial.
You just don't do it. That's when you have plenty of land. You don't do that.
Yeah. And so today we go, why did you do that? And then the fourth one, which is the smallest because it only applies to 10 states, is the BLM option, which would add 146,000, or over 10 years, 1.5 million. So again, you put all that together and it's 1.7 million homes a year. Now, we don't need 1.7 million homes a year, but this just demonstrates as a thought experiment that there's plenty of policy options that get us plenty of houses. And by the way, those houses, for the reasons we already talked about, are going to be less expensive than either the homes built today on new residential subdivision land, or the McMansions that are getting built on existing lots rather than building 3 or 4 townhomes on those lots. Again, all of the data we get, and starting with all the data coming on the title side and the public record side, is the foundation of strong foundations. We couldn't do it without those data. So that's one thing. There's another thing that is just very early. I call it, it's even early in the basic laboratory, science laboratory. We're working with an investor, large investor in single family rentals, which is a topic that top of mind across the country, thanks to President Trump being interested in this. And so we're trying to figure out, and it's not an easy solution to noodle, how do you make rent to own work? It's been talked about for a very long time. Nobody's actually successfully, to my knowledge, scaled it. That's not for lack of effort, but it just hasn't been able to be scaled. And so we're working with one of these large institutional investors to combine their knowledge, because they have a lot of detail about not only the economics workings of single family rental market, how it works, property by property, but they also have a lot of information about the tenants and how qualified might they be to become an owner. And so we're working on that. But again, title comes into play here. I already had a discussion with one title company, said, well, one of the things is, in order to make this work at the point where they convert from being a renter to an owner, is the closing cost. Well, is there a way? I did back in 1991, I put together the first no closing cost loan for refi back in 1991 with Mellon Bank, and I figured out how to cut through the reissue of title insurance. The buyer, the homeowner, already had owner's title. We just needed to get an update for the refi, and we eventually were able to go with a reissue rate that ended up being a small fraction of what the rack rate was. And so given that the closing costs were all being paid by one party, the bank, because it was a no closing cost loan, we figured out how to, in some cases, reduce the closing costs.
Sure.
And so to try to there's 3 or 4 sort of critical points that have to be overcome. A, you have to get a qualified buyer. B, you have to be able to figure out how to set the sales price down the road. C, they have to have enough wherewithal to be that qualified buyer with a down payment and stuff. But D, you need to cut those closing costs down. But one of the other things you're doing is, if you had somebody moving as a first-time buyer from rental into a house, they also have moving expenses. Well, if you're taking somebody that already lives in the house, they don't have any moving expenses.
Just bridge them over to ownership from rental, yeah.
They can move to ownership without moving. Well, that's a big savings. Number 2, if you can do something with the closing costs. So again, on this reissue policy, well, the owner of the property already has a title policy. Is there a way to sort of do something there? Number 1. Number 2, well, if you can, they already live in the house, so the day you close is irrelevant. So what's one of the things that you have to do when you figure out on the closing date? Odds days interest. What's odds days interest? Well, that's the amount of interest you have to pay at this point to make up for next month when you won't be making a payment. Well, if you schedule the closing so the odds days interest is 0, the person's already living there. They're not moving. Then you set it for the date that it's 0. They don't need to escrow for the odds days interest, which again could be $1,500. And so whittle down, can you get the $6,000 closing cost or whatever it is down to maybe $3,000, and no moving expenses. So now you've taken what could be a $13,000 transaction cost of closing costs plus moving expenses, and you've reduced it to $3,000. I call that a whole day's work.
Yes.
That's a good outcome. So that's where we're looking there, and we see the title insurance industry could potentially, along with other industry players, could be influential in this. Same thing on the survey. The property has a survey that the current owner got. Can you bring that survey down? Again, are there things you can do with homeowners insurance? Or again, the list goes on and on. If you save a little bit here and save, pretty soon you're talking about real money, because it's at the margin that you're really making this work.
Yeah. Well, and taking a lot of friction out of
converting
exactly. those renters to buyers. No, those are very good ideas. And I love that by being data driven, you're able to have these resources, and we'll link them all in the show notes, because I know that our audience will take advantage of them. But, another struggle that the industry has is, again, people tend to look at this at the macro level, at the national level, and location, location, location. Big one-size-fits-all prescriptions almost never work. The efforts that are the most impactful in the direction we want them to go are at that very hyper-local level. And so I love that you are able to tailor it specifically for things that'll work better in one area. Let's pursue those, and let's just factor out the noise of these others, because it's just a distraction, and it burns up good time and opportunity.
On that point, and this might be a good point to somewhat close on, is we've looked at what's going on at the state level, and I think I mentioned in the green room that we've identified 13 or 14, 15 states that have legislation currently being considered by a legislature actively as we speak. Those legislatures that are in session, we've identified 14 or 15 of them, and they have bills that, in effect, do something relative to the three plays in the playbook. Of course, the BLM, they can't deal with directly. So the three plays are new residential subdivisions, fill, smaller lot infill, and residential and commercial. And there are 13 or 14 states that are looking at that. I call it unfreezing capital, because land is, again, back to the title industry, land is the most valuable form of capital we have. Human capital is very valuable, extremely valuable, but of the physical things, land is it. They're not making any more. So underutilizing land should almost be a criminal offense. And so these 33,000 jurisdictions should really, it's a criminal offense not to allow people to just do what comes natural, is over time make, a little bit more density. We call it light touch density. What these 33,000, largely 33,000 jurisdictions are doing for their own self-interest, they are taking an insect and they're preserving it in amber, which is how scientists find a lot of insects and things that are preserved in amber. That's what they've done with houses. We're not going to allow any change. Well, change is normal. Think of any city in the world and go back over hundreds of years. Is it identical to where it was hundreds of years ago? Yet these towns and cities are saying, Los Angeles, we don't want anything to change. Nothing can change. Well, that is not the way the world works, but that's where they are. So we need to allow some amount of change. We call it light touch density in these existing single family areas. We call it residential and commercial, where you've already got some mid-rise and high-rise building. You already have commercial activity. Why wouldn't you want residential there? Why wouldn't you want some townhomes or a 3 or 4 story platform over parking building or a 10-story building? Why wouldn't you want that? And it's just common sense that that's the next logical thing. But as someone once said, common sense is neither common nor sense in many cases. But here, common sense says this is what you do, but these 37,000 jurisdictions are fighting it tooth and nail. And that's why the focus is on the states. The states can trump that because they have the ultimate power under the 10th Amendment.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I
Thank
hope
you,
that
Mary.
you'll come
My
back
pleasure.
soon
Okay.
and check in on after some of these get a little bit more time baked in. And I'd love to have an update to see how things are going.
I'm going to send you a map on Dubuque metro area, Greater Dubuque.
I will enjoy that.
Okay. Thanks, Mary. Take care.
Thanks again, Ed, so much for joining us. We appreciate both the analysis and the recommendations you delivered. And whether we're talking about zoning reform or tax policy or mortgage risk, Ed keeps coming back to the same question. Does this proposal add to housing supply or doesn't it? And if it doesn't, we shouldn't be surprised when affordability keeps slipping further out of reach. Now, linked in today's show notes are all the valuable resources Ed mentioned, so go to the show notes and check those out. And also, we've linked to our new resource library, the Housing Inventory and Attainability Watch. It consolidates all of our ongoing coverage and reporting in this area. And we all know we have a long way to go to get the inventory levels we need at the prices people can afford and maintain. So we invite you to follow along as our coverage keeps you covered. And finally, I love how Ed reminded us that data turns into information, information becomes knowledge, and knowledge turns into action. And that's why at October Research, we say knowledge is the competitive advantage. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.